Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Well, Jim gave me this morning. He said it's a little lighter than usual because I don't have as many words as Russ does. So there's not as many words in here. So you can bear with me. As I always start out when I'm up here is, I am not Russ. And but he called me and texted me, asked me if I would preach today, and asked if I would continue on with in the book of Acts. So I agreed, and we're in chapter 17. And I started looking at it, and there's so much in here. And I told him, you could preach 2 sermons a week for a month and not cover everything that's in Acts. And he agreed. But here we are, so we're going to have to do this. And we're continuing in the journey of Paul, following the journey of Paul as he goes through Greece and tries to spread the word into the world. And it starts out, he's in Thessalonica. And Thessalonica is a great big city. It's a port city, and there's a synagogue there, and he goes in and he preaches for three Sabbaths in the synagogue. He converts a lot of people, a lot of Jews and God-fearing Greeks. That's the word he used. And the God-fearing Greeks are basically Greeks who have converted to Judaism. And so they all have the scriptures, and Paul talks to them, and what he's basically doing is taking all the pieces of scripture that point to Christ and show them that this is how it all fits together. And he's being very successful there. But some of the Jewish leaders are upset because this is their livelihood. You know, they're losing their jobs if he converts them. So they got a whole bunch of rabble-rousers, and they rose up against Paul and his gang and basically forced them out of the city. So even though you think this might have not ended well for Paul and being forced out of Thessalonica, he actually ended up writing 2 letters to the Thessalonians later on. So it's a very important church to him. So after he got out of there, he went to Berea, which is a town about 60 miles away from Thessalonica. And I like what he talks about the Bereans. Well, actually, Luke is writing this. And it's what I hope they would talk about us the same way. It says, now the Bereans were a more noble character than the Thessalonians, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. That's what we need to do. I mean, when Russ comes up here, we know he's talking about it. But we need to go in and read the scriptures. And like I mentioned, this chapter 17 is so full and so rich that, okay, listen to what I have to say today. Go back, open up chapter 17, read through it, and see, number 1, am I telling the truth? I might be making this up. Or number 2, you'll get more out of it than you can ever get from me. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to have Bible study Monday because it's a holiday, so we won't have be able to have that dialogue on this particular chapter. But still, go through it and look at it. So then, these Thessalonians were so hot against Paul that they took their rabble and went to 60 miles to Berea to kick him out of Berea. They didn't want him anywhere near them. So Paul left Berea and went to Athens. And he left his buddies behind. So he's pretty much on his own. And I'm just going to read a few verses, then we can break it down a little bit. And I'm going to step away from the podium because Jim says I never get more than an arm's length from the podium. So I'm going to get there. Okay. I'm going to start with verse 15. The men who escorted Paul brought him to Athens, and then left with instructions for Silas and Timothy to join him as soon as possible. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean." And in parentheses it says, "All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Now, two things I want to bring up here. One is, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. I mean, he was actually hurting for them because he knew they were worshiping, but they were worshiping the wrong things. And I was reading about this, and at that time in Athens, they worshiped about 30,000 different gods. They had a god for everything. And so he was truly distressed to see this because as a Jew, he was brought up pretty strongly against idols. The second commandment is about idols. Don't have graven images. And, we all know what happened with the golden calf in the desert. So he was actually hurting for these people because he was very empathetic for people. He could see these people are doomed unless they change. And so we think, I like to bring everything into a modern context. And so he sees this town full of idols. And we say, well, we don't have that. Jim, you want to put up the New York picture? This is Times Square. Do you see any idols there? We have more idols than I think the Greeks did. And now, if you want to bring up the football thing, this is just a generic football. I wanted to talk about football because there's a pretty decent team in the Midwest called the Kansas City Chiefs. And they have a very strong fan base. Sometimes they're so strong that they become idol worshipers. They say, I'm such a good fan. If you cut me, I bleed red. Well, we all do that. But still, they have a really strong fan base. And some of their fans get so fanatical that they kind of lose sight of their priorities are messed up. But then last fall, something happened that made it even worse. Taylor Swift showed up. And now she's got her own fan base, and she's an idol. They're an idol. So now we have the clash of the titans, the two gods mixing together. And I looked it up, and every week when Taylor Swift showed up at a game, the networks got 2.4 million more viewers than when she wasn't there. And they had her on the screen for less than a minute during that whole program. And it also, her presence gained about $330 million for the NFL just in revenue from advertising. So we have these two idols. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Bob might disagree, but that's not a sin. And it's not a sin to be a Swiftie. But when either one of them gets between you and God, that's when there's a problem. And so we have to watch our idols. We have a lot of idols. Sports is a big one. So is money, sex, drugs. Drugs is terrible. Drugs are bad because it grabs you and holds you. And then we have the internet. We have the TikTok. We have all that stuff. And to keep on this theme of making things more modern, he reasoned in the synagogues with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well in the marketplace with those who happened to be there. So the marketplace, that's the mall. So he's in the mall where all the cool kids go, and he's just talking to them. They're just there, and in that parentheses thing it says, they spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Isn't that what we do when we get on the internet and we look on Facebook or TikTok or YouTube, whatever? We're looking for something new. We're just idling. That's what they're doing. So instead of saying he's going to the mall where all the Generation Zers are there with their iPhones, he's going to the marketplace where all the Generation Omegas are there with their tablets. It's the same thing. It's just a modern thing. People still do the same things. And I was telling Mary Jo a little bit ago that we all know that Moses was the first person to download a text from the cloud onto a tablet. I hope you understand that. Anyway, so let's get on. We've got the idol thing going, and it really hurts Paul. It's not just it makes him mad, it hurts him to see that. So then they went to the Areopagus, and the Areopagus is a hill. It's right next to the Parthenon, where the statue of Athena is. And the statue of Athena, she was a main god. She was like this patron god of Athens. They had a 40-foot tall statue clad in ivory and gold. It was a big deal. And just below that was the Areopagus, which is named for Ares, which is their god of war. And then later on, the Romans, their god of war was Mars, so they call it Mars Hill, but it's the Areopagus in here. Anyway, but it was also the site of their Supreme Court and where they had meetings. So here, Paul, it's just like when he was in Jerusalem, when he dragged before the Sanhedrin. Now he dragged before the Supreme Court of Athens. But here it's not a trial. They're more curious because they're philosophers. And it mentions the Stoics and the Epicureans. Well, the Epicureans were people who lived for pleasure. They just wanted to enjoy life. They were atheists. They didn't believe God was going to do anything to them. They just wanted to enjoy life and just be that. The Stoics were Stoic. They wanted to endure life. They figured the gods would do what they would do to them, and for them it was just, as Russ said a couple weeks ago, it is what it is. That's a Stoic response. So he had these two different groups, and he's trying to talk to. And then I'll pick up the story here from there. Paul then stood in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with its inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now that you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you." So here Paul, as he was walking around, he's a smart guy. He just walked around. He sees all these things and all these idols and these little, what do you call them? Anyway. And he sees one to an unknown God. He says, what the heck is this? What it shows him is that with all these 30,000 gods, they know they still are missing something. And so he's going to show them what they're missing. Now, real quickly, how that unknown God came about, and I heard this story and hope if it's true or not, I don't know. But there was a plague. About 600 years before this, there was a plague in Athens, and people were dying. People were getting sick. And they all knew that they must have made a god mad to have this happen. But they didn't know who. There's so many to choose from. So somebody got the wise idea of, we'll let a bunch of sheep loose in the city, and whenever sheep lays down in front of an altar or a temple, we'll sacrifice that sheep to that god. And then eventually these gods will direct the sheep, and we'll find out who it is. We may not find out, but we'll get the right one eventually. But sometimes the sheep would lay down nowhere near an altar or a temple. And so they'd sacrifice the sheep, and they'd build an altar, and they'd put "to an unknown God," because they knew that there was a God there because the sheep laid down, but they didn't know who it was. And so there were actually several of these temples, or not temples, but altars to unknown God. So now Paul's going to explain to them about who this unknown God is. The God who made the world, starting at verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. Now, the Greeks never really had a creation story. To them, the gods were there. There was the Titans before the gods, but they never had a creation story. So now Paul's telling them, this is the God who made the world. He's bigger than all your other gods. And everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so the men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So here, he just basically took the whole Bible and condensed it into about 4 verses. God created the earth, created men, gives men all life, created every nation from one man, and he wants us to seek him out, even though he's not far from us. And that's how you get to know the unknown God. He's trying to tell them, this is the God that you should be worshiping. For him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Now, I don't often think of Paul as a Greek, but he was born in Tarsus, which was a Greek town. He was a Jew born in a Greek town. He was raised in a Greek town. So he knew the Greek culture. And here he quoted two Greek poets. For in him we live and move and have our being, and we are his offspring, are two quotes from different Greek poets. So he's using their culture on them. It's important to note that he went to their place, and he started off where they were. He started off saying, I see that you're a very religious group. He didn't say, oh, these idols are terrible. He didn't do that. He went to where they were and kind of worked from there to ease them around to believing that Christ is who he is. So that's what we need to do when we do our witness, our talking, whatever. We need to remember everybody's not in the same place that we are. We need to start wherever they are and go from there. And so finally he said, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance. But now he commands that all people everywhere repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. So he's just saying there will be a man who will be judging everybody, and we need to repent. And he proved that this man was going to be judging us by raising him from the dead. And with that, the Greeks kind of said, I think I've had enough of this. They didn't really like what he was saying. And so I'll just read what the rest of it says. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. A few men became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. So he had a few converts, but it really wasn't a rousing success. And I think, and a couple of the commentaries I've read said that they kind of cut him off. He didn't get to the end of his message. And he actually says later in the next chapter, as Russ will talk about in Corinth, he says, I'm not going to preach, I'm just only going to preach about Christ and him risen. But when I started looking at this, and I saw that, these Greeks, they weren't there to get converted. They were there to exercise their minds and to just hear something new, something that tickled their brains. And he just wasn't doing it for them. And I started looking through it, and what struck me was if you just read what he said, that's not a rousing message. You need to repent, and you're going to be judged. He left out the part, or he didn't get to the part about grace. Grace is the message. Grace is where we're forgiven. Like last week, Russ said, forget the past. The past is done. The past is forgiven. And I made a little joke to Dave Simpson last week after his witness. I said, did you hear what Russ just said? He said, forget history. You spent 35 years teaching history. Well, and Russ says, forget it. But it's true. I mean, forget your history. I mean, grace is what the message should be. So, and every time I do a talk like this, I want to make sure that I leave with a message, something that you can take away. One is watch your idols. I mean, everybody. I looked it up. The average person spends 2.5 hours a day on the internet for some reason or another. Teenagers spend more like 8 hours. So it's a good thing. The information is just wonderful. You can learn all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of bad stuff out there. Number one, we need to protect our kids from the bad stuff. But also we need to make sure that we're not just glued to something to where we're so distracted that we lose track of who we are and whose we are. We need to make sure that we keep track of that. And that's not the only idols. Like I said, there's all these different things. And Dinah will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's either the Greek or the Aramaic, but the word for idolatry and adultery is the same word. So think about that. What? Okay, she said I'm right. Wow, that won't happen again. But the same thing. And the other thing that when I was in the prison, one of the guys was talking about when in the story where the young boy had a demon and he was thrashing on the floor and he was foaming at the mouth and he was demon possessed. He says it's exactly what happens when these guys smoke tune. And tune is when they spray the bug poison on a piece of paper, then they smoke it. And they go into convulsions. And he said that's exactly in the Bible. And it's demon possession. And that's what drugs, we got to be careful. You know, the drugs, they grab you. I've seen it firsthand, and I see it in the prisons. So anyway, we need to watch our idols. We need to start where they are and bring them in, not just start pounding and being an old Bible thumper. And our topic has to have grace in it. I mean, grace is what draws people in. And without the grace, we're not going to have any luck at all, because grace is what gets them thinking. And the other thing is, Paul walked away from this. He went to Corinth. And he didn't worry about it, because our job is not to convert people. Our job is to witness. Our job is to spread the word. Once they hear the word, it's God's job to convert. So with that, I'm about done. I do have two prison prayers I want to share. We got 47 new guys, and so we're being overwhelmed with prayer requests. We're in there twice a week, and these guys are serious about it. But two of them I wanted to share. One, the guy didn't even write it down. He just told me about it. He said, I ask your prayers for everyone who doesn't take the time to pray for themselves. I thought that was pretty profound. And then this guy, this is Trayvon Singleton, says, pray for all my relationships and everything. I need help with everything in my life. So I think that's pretty much a universal prayer. So with that, I'll turn it over to Denise, I think. Thank you.